Hello, everybody. We're going to give this just another minute for everyone to join, and then we'll get underway very shortly. All right, we will get underway. Good morning for those of you on the East Coast and the Northeast of the U.S., and good afternoon if you're joining us from Europe or many other parts of the world. It's great to have so many folks joining us today. I'm Peter Rothstein, the president of NECEC, the Northeast Clean Energy Council. And welcome to our second event in our Connecting Regions on the Road to COP26 series. This specific event in this series is focused on decarbonizing our cities and buildings, cities and the built environment. This event series is being sponsored by National Grid, who's also a principal partner for COP26. And this event is also a part of NECEC's annual Emerging Trends series. So welcome. This topic we're going to be talking about today on decarbonizing buildings is a critical component of addressing climate change and the transition to a clean economy. Buildings generate nearly 40% of annual global greenhouse gas emissions, and approximately 2/3 of the building area that exists today will still exist in 2050. So there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be revitalized to be able to address this need and opportunity. So where do buildings come in? Where do communities, districts, cities come in? How do we scale decarbonization in the sector? How do we innovate? How do we partner? All of those things are going to be part of what we're going to be talking about in today's event. To help kick us off and to help frame some of these pieces of discussion that we'll be digging into, I want to introduce Dr. Peter Abbott, who's Her Majesty's Consul General. He's with the British Consulate General office here in the Boston area, focusing on relationships and joint opportunities between the UK and New England here in the US. So Peter, the floor is yours if you want to turn on your camera.
That's fantastic. Peter, thank you very much indeed for the introduction and indeed for the invitation to speak on this panel today. The NECEC is doing fantastic work here in the Northeast, and it's a great pleasure to be back with you again, speaking to the audience today. I think the kind of the composition of the various panels and discussions today, really highlights the importance of partnerships. You've already recognised National Grid and National Grid's sponsorship, not just of this session today, but also as a principal partner of COP26. And I think that relationship between government, between civil society, the private sector, business, and also universities, I think is really critical. And it's great that we've got Boston University on the line today, and the University of Edinburgh as well, working together across, as I said, business, government, civil society, and the academic sector. I think is really important as we approach the challenge of climate change. The UK is hosting COP26 in Glasgow in November, and it is still the British government's ambition for that to be an in-person event. Let's see. We hope that ambition holds. And partnerships are really at the heart of what we're calling a whole of society COP26. And the overall goals for COP, which I thought I would just set out right here at the start, many of you will be familiar with them already, but I think there are sort of three key goals really. The first is our ambition to hit global net zero by the middle of the century, and keeping that 1.5 degrees centigrade warming target in reach. The second goal is to help communities and natural habitats adapt so that they can be protected against the worst effects of climate change. And the third goal is a financial one, to mobilise around £100 billion worth of climate finance by developed countries every year by the end of this year. So that financing piece, I think, is really important. And then all of that is underpinned by this idea of partnership, of being able to do all of this together. So COP26 takes place over the course of about a couple of weeks in November, and on the 11th of November, which is in fact the last day of COP26, the theme of that day will be cities, regions, and the built environment. And I think the fact that that comes at the very end, right before the negotiations conclude, I think signals the importance of cities and the built environment to our ability collectively to meet that 1.5 degrees centigrade warming target. Peter already said buildings and construction account for about 40% of global carbon emissions. And I saw a statistic that said that 50% of the buildings that are predicted to be needed by 2050 have not actually been built yet. And all of these are estimates, of course, but I think that offers a huge opportunity to make sure that the buildings that are built from here on are as carbon neutral as they possibly can be. And I think that looking at the role of cities, I think is absolutely central to all of this. It's not just where the majority of our built environment is, but it's also, you know, where I've said before, where cities lead, nations follow. And I think, you know, that's at the heart of the Cities Race to Zero campaign that the UNFCCC is running. It's at the heart of the UNFCCC's Race to Resilience campaign, because cities, I think, as places of innovation and creativity, and really partnerships as well, at the heart of what makes cities tick, whether we're talking about electrification, community microgrids, for example, environmental justice solutions, waste, food security, urban cooling, nature-based resilience, and of course decarbonising the built environment. Cities are right at the heart, I think, of solutions to all of those things. Back in November, the UK launched what we're calling our 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution. That is basically our kind of strategy, our roadmap for achieving what the UK put into law last year, legislation for net zero. We were the first major economy in the world to legislate for net zero, and this 10-point plan is our way, really, I think, of meeting that legally mandated target. The big chunk of that is about the built environment, and it's based on the assumption partly that we think that greener buildings can support around 50,000 jobs by 2030. We think green buildings can create and support around £10 billion worth of private investment over the course of this decade, and of course cut UK emissions by around 16%. So there's a very strong, I think, economic development angle to greening and decarbonising the built environment. In the UK, we're implementing something called the Future Homes Standard, so that when that standard is implemented, all homes built under that standard will be zero carbon ready, and will produce about 80% less carbon dioxide than homes that are being built today. We're also committed to installing 600,000 heat pumps every year by 2028, and of course, non-domestic building standards are next on our list of areas to tackle in the UK. So I'm really looking forward to sharing some of that experience and that knowledge over the course of today's panel. I think the UK has lots in common with the Northeast of the United States, both in terms of the age of some of our housing and building stock and infrastructure, in terms of our climate, and in terms of our energy needs as well. So I think we're really natural partners, and I'm very grateful, Peter, to you and to the NECEC for bringing us all together today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Dr. Abbott, that was very well framed, and there is so much progress, I think, starting to take place, and yet there's so much more work ahead of us. And so this is a great time to be doing this event. And thank you for being such an important kickoff part of it today. Thank you. Now, Kate, if I could have the slides back up again for a moment, I think the second slide with the event agenda. The one before that for a moment. Thank you. So we have three major parts of the agenda that are coming up. In just a moment, we're going to be starting the panel discussion, which Alistair Pym, NECEC's VP of Innovation Partnerships, will introduce and moderate. That will be followed by a fireside chat, which I will have the pleasure of moderating. And then we have at the last segment an innovation lightning round, some very brief perspectives and presentations on some innovations related to cities and buildings that will be very relevant for this whole discussion. So stay with us throughout all of this. And to take us to just before we get to the panel, Kate, the next page, thank you. For our listeners and attendees today, you do have the ability to ask questions of the panelists as in the segment coming up. The Q&A choice at the bottom of your screen is where you can enter questions, and the panelists may respond directly in the Q&A box, or Alistair may ask questions from that during this session as well. So please use that as you have questions for the panelists. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Alistair Pym to introduce and to kick off this panel. Alistair.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you, Peter Abbott, for such a great sort of context setting to set the stage for the panel. So, the challenge is, how do we adapt our cities to fight climate change? And what can be done to develop a new energy system for the buildings in our cities? So, ever since I became aware of the challenge of climate change, which was about 15 years ago, it became apparent to me, why this is concentrated in cities, where we consume over 75% of the world's energy and where about 80% of emissions come from. A lot of that is from buildings, as Peter Abbott mentioned. So ever since then, I've been really fascinated by how we're going to transform. How are we going to power our cities in the future? How are we going to heat and cool and light our buildings? Now, it seems to me that what I've learned over the last 15 years is that there are a lot of new innovations and approaches, but we're very slow to adapt and adopt them. But as Peter Abbott said, that represents a great opportunity. So I'm really delighted to welcome our panelists today, who are all experts in this journey, and each comes with a different perspective. So I'm really looking forward to hearing them share their expertise. And so I'd like to introduce Mike Sullivan, who is the president of the building segment at Schneider Electric globally. Judith Judson, who is the VP and head of US strategy at National Grid. Irini Skula, who is the technical lead and for energy and buildings at C40 Cities. And Jeff Gunn, who is the energy systems lead at ARRIC. So what I'm going to do is jump straight into questions. And as I do that, I'll ask each of them to say a few words of introduction. But I'd like to kick off by asking Irini the first question, which is, what's being done currently to reduce emissions of buildings in cities? You've got a great perspective from your role in C40, helping cities develop climate action plans, etc., and based on your work in the city of Athens as well. So Irini, if you could switch your video on and answer the first question, then I'll come to the other panelists.
Hi, Alistair, and I hope you can see me. I have my video on, so great, thumbs up. Hello to everyone, good morning and good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting us, inviting C40 to this event, which we think is really, really important. And this is really a hot topic for cities worldwide. For those of you that you do not know, C40 is a network of almost 100 mega cities around the world. And we work closely with them, facilitating peer interactions and providing technical assistance to our cities to be able to achieve their ambitious climate targets. So without further ado, I'm going to your question, Alistair. So in the case of cities, building emissions account for over 50% of the emissions in our network. So really early, our cities have recognized that they cannot achieve their climate targets without reducing emissions from buildings through energy efficiency and without moving away from fossil fuels to heat, cool, or power them. In 2018, in GCAS conference that happened in San Francisco, C40 launched together with the World Building Council the Net Zero Carbon Buildings Declaration. Cities that endorse the declaration, and we already have 28 signatories worldwide, commit and implement actions to ensure that all new buildings operate at net zero carbon by 2030, and all buildings will operate by net zero by 2050. These are very, very ambitious targets and have been endorsed by cities, both from global North cities and global South. So what does that mean? How do cities, what do the cities do to reach those goals? First and foremost, they lead by example. We think that it's one of the most important actions that cities can take and show the way forward to the private sector. So cities commit that all buildings they own, occupy, or develop are net zero by 2030, earlier for in comparison to the private existing buildings. All buildings to be net zero by 2030. This is really, really ambitious. We have very, very nice examples, and I will use the Boston one, which the city of Boston has issued an executive order requiring all new municipal buildings to target a zero net carbon standard. And they have already finished an 11 million investment in energy efficiency retrofits and renewable energy upgrades in 14 buildings, municipal buildings. And they have really, really achieved great savings already from the first year. The second very important action that cities are taking is that they are setting, where their powers allow it, mandatory energy performance requirements for buildings, either for segments of buildings at the beginning or for all buildings. We have many good examples there, from Washington to New York City, but also far in the east, Tokyo has a very important cap and trade program, which it's mandatory and requires all buildings to either cut their emissions or trade or purchase offset credits. Because the carbon price is so high, commercial building owners really prefer to do retrofits, and they have already seen in the 5 years that the program is running more than 20% reduction in the emissions of those buildings. Third, cities can develop incentives, financial and non-financial, from tax rebates and grants to, let's say, programs like the Better Buildings Partnership that Toronto and Sydney run to motivate the private sector to do energy efficiency upgrades. Finally, where electrification has reached its, let's say, its highest potential, the remaining energy supply is to be provided by renewable energy. And we have already cities like Montreal in Canada or Seattle taking action to remove heating oil from buildings. We also think it's very, very crucial, and I'm finishing with that cities develop net zero carbon pathways. These pathways need to send clear steps and milestones towards this journey, so they have concrete targets and concrete milestones to achieve. Our 4 South African cities, and I'm using now a Global South example, have already implemented these pathways, and the past year have already developed the bylaws that will require all new buildings in South Africa, in Johannesburg, Cape Town, Durban, and Tshwane, to be net zero carbon, which is a massive change for those cities in South Africa. I hope I think these are the key actions that cities can do. I can speak for hours, but yeah.
That's a great start, Irini, and thank you for some really good concrete actions that cities can take, and some great examples of the leaders who are already doing that. So let's turn to Mike next, just to ask the same question. What's being done currently from your perspective, Mike, as a global leader in building technology?
Yeah, thanks, Alistair, for introduction. For those of you who aren't familiar with Schneider Electric, was the company, multinational company, selected by Corporate Knights this year as the most sustainable company in the world, not only because of what we've done with our own sites, which we've made a lot of progress, but also what we're doing to help with the energy transition. And I'm responsible for building segments for the past 10 years across healthcare, hotels, offices, and we have a lot of experience, a lot of technologies across all our countries and divisions that we're working with on there. And what I'm saying is, speaking with my colleagues, I think they'll take a certain point of view. We see the world needs to go all digital and all electric. On the all electric side, I think our panelists will give you some really good ideas about what we need to do to switch to renewable sources, microgrids, heat pumps. But what I think COP may be missing and may not have enough focus on is the need to move to all digital. We're still constructing buildings like we did in the last century. And we need to move to all digital because of the potential it has for sustainability, but also for hyper efficiency, resiliency, and people-centric buildings as a bonus. If you take sustainability alone, and you take just Schneider Electric alone, right? Just what we did in our own building, the building I'm sitting in right here. Just applying these digital technologies to an existing building, we saved 57% of our energy. 95% of the buildings are already built. And with some of these digital technologies, you can cut that in half. And what we need to do going forward with COP is to digitally enable buildings so that we can do not only that, but more in the future to complement what we're doing on the supply side with all electric. So that would be our point of view.
That's great, Mike. Very succinct. Thank you. So let me turn to Judith Judson and hear your perspective, please, Judith.
Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, I want to thank NECC for hosting this event, and I'm very proud that National Grid is a part of this event today. For those of you who aren't aware, although it was mentioned earlier, we are a principal partner in COP26, and we are doing that because of our absolute commitment to reaching a net zero energy future that is fair and affordable for all. So when we think about the challenges, decarbonizing the way we heat our buildings is probably one of the biggest challenges we have to meeting our goals to reduce emissions and to achieve a net zero energy future. We think there's no one right answer, and it's really going to take all the tools in our toolkit in order to get there. We think we are capable of delivering that to our customers, but it really takes utilizing all the measures we have, and probably some that we haven't thought of yet. When we look at this, we think there's two ways to meet our emissions goals, and it requires both a cleaner supply of energy along with using less energy overall. So when we think about first, less energy, we've done a tremendous job in the Northeast. So we serve customers in Massachusetts and New York, as well as in the UK. We have done a tremendous job in the Northeast. Both, our states are leaders in energy efficiency, but we're going to have to scale up and do more. We need to increase the pace, increase the scale of deep energy retrofits, in particular for existing buildings, as what we heard at the buildings we have today, most of them will be here in 2050. And we see that as an absolute key part of the equation. We also then need to look at how do we scale up renewable supply. And we see opportunities not only in electrification, where we have programs to support the conversion of those that currently heat with oil to heating with heat pumps, but also in looking at new supply for making our molecules, our gas molecules, cleaner. And that relates to renewable natural gas that comes from wastewater, landfills, food waste, as well as hydrogen. Hydrogen is seeing a big adoption in Europe. We have experience with that in the UK, and we see that as a real opportunity here, particularly as we scale up the amount of renewable that are generating electricity, our offshore wind supplies. We can use that clean electricity to make hydrogen here in order to leverage that capability to deliver clean heat to the customers that we provide that to. We also need to be thinking about customer affordability and equity. Today, heat pumps and some of these supplies currently cost more than the status quo. So market transformation is needed to bring down the cost and ensure that we are able to continue going forward to supply affordable solutions for all our customers, including those most vulnerable. And it was interesting to hear, of course, our incentive programs through energy efficiency help do that. But working together now to increase supply, bring adoption in order so that we can have that market transformation to reduce costs. And then I think there's other interesting technologies on the horizon that we're supporting. Geothermal is another opportunity to evolve our heating within cities that can utilize existing networks and resources that we already have. So we see a lot of potential, but we really think it is going to take thinking about how we utilize our whole system. And I'll leave you just with one last thing. Today, the amount of energy used for heating in the winter is 3 times the amount of energy that our electric grid uses in the summer. So making that transformation to how we have a clean supply as well as more efficiency to enable the transformation of heat is going to be that challenge, and going to be really take a variety of methods, all of which we're excited about and working on. So thank you.
That is great. Thank you, Judith. Really good perspective from the utility and the network operator. So let me turn now to Jeff Gunn from Arup, which is a global design firm known for excellence in design and also implementing those designs, covering all sorts of aspects for buildings. But Jeff, let me hear your perspective, please.
Sure. Yeah, I think I'm going to build a lot on what Judith was just talking about here. I mean, I think we firmly believe there isn't one silver bullet for decarbonization. Certainly, as Mike said, electrifying everything I think is a good start, and we should electrify as much as we can. If you look in the U.S., somewhere around 57% of the homes right now are heated by natural gas. I would say, all the ones that aren't currently, we should certainly look at electrifying those and, using heat pump technology to, efficiently heat those and cool those. And then look at, existing assets that we have, such as natural gas pipelines, and how can we use those and leverage those to those, existing resources and assets to, things like piped hydrogen, stuff like that. So that we have as many solutions as possible that people can bring to bear to solve the decarbonization problem. I think if we put all of our eggs in one basket, we're probably not going to be successful. In the UK, for example, we've worked on a whole bunch of kind of different studies looking at all different parts of that hydrogen ecosystem, from business cases down through to end implementations in end users, buildings, and things like that, and looking at how we can make sure that we can do it both safely and cost effectively. So, to me, it's making sure that we have access to a wide range of solutions. I think, one of the interesting stats that I've seen is if you look in the residential space, something like 80% of HVAC and air conditioning replacements are done under duress. Somebody's system has failed and they need to go and replace it. And so we need to make sure that when you go to the store to pick up your AC that you need, that afternoon, an option that can lead you to decarbonization is available. So if we're talking about the sites that should be converting to heat pumps, making sure that they can get that heat pump instead of a straight air conditioning unit, so that they, maybe they're not going to decarbonize right then, but the cost premium right now is minimal. We need to make it go away, and then make it easily accessible, so that the barrier to entry is much lower, right? If people are going out and purchasing equipment that they need that afternoon and the decarbonized option isn't there, we've lost that window for the next 8, 10, 15 years to go in and decarbonize that piece of equipment.
That's great. Thank you, Jeff. Good perspective from another global company. So you started to talk about some of the sort of the challenges and the new approaches we need to take, some of the innovations that we need on top of what we're doing already. And I'd like to turn back to Mike. I mean, you focus very much on digital, but what else? So you have this idea of saying everything should be digital, but what approaches could we take to actually get the industry to transform?
I think there's a couple of ways, because I think when buildings become digital, right, there's a few things you can do from the supply side. You think about grids and microgrids, trying to balance the grid with demand response, right? We know, Schneider Electric is a major investor in Uplight, right? One of the companies that can go into your Nest thermostat and drop it, right, when necessary, when there's a peak load. If a building, even the simplest case of a home, is not digital, you can't do these things very effectively. So then you start to get into commercial buildings and other buildings, the amount of savings on a digital building is big. But no, we're just specifically looking at just what digital technologies can do. Typical building, you've got facility manager in there. Okay, you got to change energy. I'll change the light bulbs. I'll do some simple things, but they can't monitor 2,500 points all the time. And when we put these digital technologies on top, we've found that on average, 50 to 60% are not running optimally. Faulty valves, dampers, boilers at the wrong temperature, all kinds of just pure waste that you could solve with human energy, but you'll never be able to afford it. Right? So it's a low-hanging fruit with a very fast return on investment for existing buildings, as well as building them differently in the future so that they're much more efficient.
So quick follow-up question. You talk about quick returns. So what's the sort of range you've seen in your
3 months? 3 months.
3 months.
So you take, we're here in Boston, right? So you have MIT, which is one of our big engineering schools here in Cambridge. They had about 450,000 square feet of buildings on one part of the campus. They invested $50K in some analytics, and within 6 months got more than a $400,000 savings that they'll save on an annual basis. I think of another big company, biotech company based here, Amgen, implemented similar technologies and found 1.25 million in annual savings. So it's a quick return on investment, it's significant, and it moves the needle on sustainability.
And how quickly can you implement solutions like that?
Within a month.
Okay. People should be knocking at your door. Good to hear. Excellent. Thank you, Mike. Let's ask Irini the same sort of question, right? So you touched on some of the things which are happening and what needs to be done, but any specific new approaches or innovations that are needed that we haven't talked about yet?
Innovation is good. And I think everyone needs to work more in the research on new technologies and tools and let's say, building design principles that could be applied. But we should also exploit the most existing also solutions, which have not been fully exploited so far. Talking from a city's perspective, I think it's really key. Collaboration is key. Working closer with utilities. It's not an innovative approach, but it's an approach that is needed to accelerate action for building decarbonization. Cities need to work with utilities in cases they don't already, because utilities can facilitate access to energy data, which can help you plan policies and also can empower public and private consumers to take, let's say, informed-based decisions. But they can also work together, as Judith was saying earlier, to develop schemes to promote retrofits and so many other things they can do. I think also talking about the issue of the days, I think it's really, really crucial to combine building decarbonization with a green and just recovery from the pandemic. I think Peter mentioned at the beginning that there is a huge potential in job creation from retrofits and new efficient construction. So we shouldn't leave that opportunity get lost. There is a momentum now that needs to be further exploited. And finally, I think I want to make a point that was also mentioned before, that we need to make sure that this transition does not leave anyone behind. We need to make sure that there is an equal distribution of the benefits and the costs, because this transition, as the market is now, so well, that's why we need the market transformation, is really high capital cost. So we need to make sure that we do not do this for few, but we do it for all. I think that that's a key approach we need to follow.
Yeah, that brings up a really important point. I mean, I think the Green New Deal or the British 10-point plan or whatever it's called anywhere is encourage governments and city governments to think about how to reinvest to create jobs and to accelerate the transition. But I read recently that in the last 12 months, 80% of that stimulus money has gone supporting fossil fuels. So we're not doing it right yet. So the market transformation really needs to happen. So Judith, let me ask you that question. So you touched on sort of some of the things which you think needs to happen, but in terms of new approaches and any other innovations, what do you think needs to happen and to change?
Yeah, well, first I want to build off a point that Irene said. We need to approach this challenge with collaboration and by working together. And I fully agree that it will be essential for utilities to work hand in hand with cities and with states. There's a proceeding in Massachusetts today, 2080, looking at the future of gas, with a lot of stakeholder collaboration. And I really do think that a diverse set of input into how we solve this challenge will be key. So in terms of approach, I think we need to embrace that. Maybe that's not new, but that's something that we need. I don't think we always do, and it's going to be essential here. When we look at new, there are opportunities to decarbonize molecules. So I do think it is important to make the investment and look at ways to scale renewable natural gas, to look at the opportunities around hydrogen, to support investment in those opportunities, the same way we supported ways to decarbonize the power sector early on. And by doing that, we can have that additional diversity of clean energy in our region. We can leverage existing infrastructure, and we can enable that market transformation to reduce the cost of those supply from today's costs. DOE has launched the Earthshot around hydrogen. I think that's fantastic, and I think that's exactly what needed, because if we look across the spectrum of what we're going to need to do, it requires a tremendous change in energy. And the more options we have, the more I think the higher likelihood that we can get there. And then of course, and technologies that can assist with reducing energy consumption. I think the digital idea that Mike is raising is really interesting. We would say probably, though, all options in terms of supply, but the ways we can utilize and leverage our capabilities from other industries and digital technologies to enable buildings to consume less energy, that is going to help reduce cost for those that are paying the bills for that energy. So it'd be great to see this in homes as well as commercial. And also, enable, the lower amount of supply will enable us to be able to utilize this wide range of technologies where we're still building up the supply capability. So I think they go hand in hand, and by looking at innovative ways to both reduce consumption as well as increase the supply of renewable energy, both in molecules as well as electrons, will get us there.
Thank you, Judith. I'm going to ask Jeff the same question, but I want to encourage the panel to kind of interrupt and add comments or even ask questions. So please feel free to do that as we go through this panel. And I'm also seeing some great questions from the audience. So I'd encourage the audience to keep putting questions in the Q&A, and I will start to interject with some of those questions as well. So Jeff, I think you touched on kind of the hydrogen innovation and new approaches being done in the UK. So maybe if you could elaborate a bit on that and share what's been done to date and what has been learned, because I think that US Northeast can learn a lot from what's happening over there.
Yeah, thanks, Alistair. So we've done, as I said, a lot of different studies in England, Scotland, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, and then more recently, we're starting to bring stuff across to Chile and the US. And I think some of the most interesting work that we've done is for the High for Heat program, which is a $25 million UK government project to establish if it's technically possible, safe and convenient to replace natural gas with hydrogen. And this study has basically like 8 or 9 parallel work streams looking at all the different aspects that go into kind of the end use, basically from the meter in. So we've looked at, how do you need to change your gas meter from what do we need to do differently for hydrogen than we're doing for natural gas? Where should it be located? What are the safety requirements around that? What level of purity should we require for hydrogen? Is that feasible to be delivered through pipelines? So we spent time working with folks like National Grid and others to kind of, figure out how pure could they actually produce, distribute hydrogen through the system, and then will that work in the buildings? We looked at things like, do we need to add a colorant to the flame? For the most part, hydrogen flames are kind of hard to see, and what we actually found out is that rather than adding a colorant, if we did careful design of the burners, you can get it to burn with a flame that is still very similar to what you see on like your natural gas stove. So from a safety perspective, people can kind of use their appliance the way they've always used their appliances. Other forms of appliance, maybe you need to add a little bit of flame detection within the unit if you're talking about a gas-fired boiler or something like that. And then we also looked at things like odorants. So, there's an odorant added to natural gas right now. Everybody's familiar with that smell, if you have a gas leak or, when the gas turns on before. And so we looked at the technical feasibility of mixing the existing odorants into the hydrogen, making sure that it transmits through the distribution pipeline and everything, and that it doesn't impact burning or the burners or any of that. And we found out that you can use the exact same odorant that we're using right now in natural gas in hydrogen, which is great. Now, again, the end user's perspective, the people in the homes and businesses don't need to change anything they're doing. It's hydrogen now instead of natural gas, but their approach to it is the exact same. And then we've looked at, how do you develop appliances that can be natural gas fired today, and then you can bring in a technician, and in 5 or 10 or 15 minutes, you can swap out the burner and the key components from a natural gas appliance to a hydrogen appliance. We all know we're not going to just switch the pull the switch on a hydrogen conversion on a pipeline overnight, but we want to make sure that, I was talking about access to technologies and things earlier, right? We want to make sure that we've already got people with appliances that can be converted, in the house in the future. So, if we do go and change some of these pipelines and such, we can immediately switch over the appliances. We don't have a huge effort to go through and redo all that. And so, if we start doing that now, they organically get into houses and commercial establishments and that kind of stuff. And then I think what's really important and really exciting is just recently we've gone through and done a full safety assessment on kind of the whole thing, come up with standards and approaches and all of that. And that's been third-party reviewed and approved. So that's kind of like ready to go, which is, a really good document that kind of sets the baseline for how we're going to do all of this conversion in a safe manner. And the conclusion really is that hydrogen can be as safe or safer than natural gas in the home and business. So I think to me, that's something that's, really exciting, that we're kind of on the cusp of being able to say, great, this is how we do it. We've rolled out demonstration projects. You can go, there's some videos on the internet you can find where they show you all the different appliances in action and, people using them in the house. So I think that's all very exciting. And then, the last thing I think I just wanted to touch on the point that Arini made about job creation. I don't think there's a better vehicle for job creation than decarbonization. If you look just at the number of heat pumps we need to install alone, right? We need to be installing thousands of those across the country every single day, maybe tens of thousands, probably tens of thousands. We don't have enough HVAC technicians and electricians to do all this work. We need to train those people, build up that workforce, and then put them at it for the next 15 or 20 years. So, that's a tremendous number of, skilled, high-paying, quality jobs that we need to make now in order to make this whole process work. Oh, you're muted, Alistair.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Bit of background noise here. So you take the box of like safety, reliability. I think the other box that needs to be ticked that Judith mentioned is affordability. So let's just talk about some myths, whether they can be completely dispelled now or not. But from a hydrogen perspective, I've understood that from a physical point of view, you can't compress hydrogen the same as natural gas. So there's that issue. And then like affordability. I mean, I heard the DOE presentation yesterday from some of the national labs saying they have this Earthshot challenge to bring the cost of hydrogen down to $1 per kilo. But is that enough to make it affordable, comparable? Is it going to change the people's bills? So I'd like to hear the answer to that one. And then heat pumps, I think we've seen them start to scale up, but a lot of people still question whether they can be effective in a northern climate where it gets cold in the winter. So Judith, perhaps if you want to start answering that question, well, there's a couple of questions.
Yeah, well, I think Jeff did a great job of talking about hydrogen and the advantages there. So of course, we're very focused on the question of affordability. It is critical to the adoption in achieving our clean energy goals and ensuring nobody's left behind. So we've been really digging into this issue. When we've been exploring hydrogen, we've been looking at what does it take from a CapEx perspective for our system. And we've been pleasantly surprised at what we can do and what it will cost. And as we compare that to other options going forward. So we do think there's an opportunity there. Specifically around the DOE's goal, targeting $1 per kilogram, hopefully I got that right, that converts to about $7 a decatherm. Today, natural gas is around, at the supply, $3, but then you have to add in transportation. But back, last decade, it was at $8. We're seeing higher. So $7 plus transport could get you to 10. Now we're in the ballpark of where we could be. And then I think that the point about comparison to heat pumps, I mean, our cost of electricity is high. So there's, that's something that we need to look at for affordability. The economics work better today when you're converting an oil customer to a heat pump. The economics don't work as well today when you're looking at, converting natural gas to a heat pump. So we think the option of hydrogen and renewable natural gas, clean molecules, is actually quite competitive with also looking at it, the potential of a heat pump. So affordability will continue to need to be looked at, but we don't think any option should be taken off the table right now, because what we're seeing is there's path forwards to affordable options for consumers.
Thank you, Judith. Quick question for Mike. I got one from the audience here from Susan Kaplan. So you mentioned go digital, but don't you think mechanical solutions might be more reliable if the grid goes down?
Well, so digital, you should think of it as a helper, right? Think of a building where you have one facility manager. Now think of 100 really experienced facility managers, 24/7, 365, checking stuff every minute. It's just a helper. So it will tell you when something is not working to an optimal point, so you can choose the top 3, 5 things to fix. And secondly, digital provides analytics to predict how to make greater efficiency gains. It has no impact on your electrical reliability. You're not dependent on that, or your mechanical reliability. It doesn't intervene with that at all, and nor is any safety or resiliency system reliant on that. It's a helper. So it's just an enhancer that you put on top that gives you the price of 100 facility managers for a very small digital investment. I mean, that's an exaggeration of how it works, but just to get a picture in your mind of nobody has time to go check everything, and digital can do that for you.
Great, that's a really good one. Thank you, Mike. I have a question here from Angie O'Connor about district energy, and I want to direct this at Jeff first. But there's been a lot of success of district energy in Europe, decarbonizing large buildings, especially hospitals, bioscience. So we have a district energy system in Boston and Cambridge. And do you see that as one of the tools in the toolbox that we can use going forward?
Absolutely. I mean, when we were talking earlier about, resources that we've already deployed, those systems are far too valuable for us to just abandon them. We need to figure out how to decarbonize the district energy systems, and then that provides low carbon power and steam to a lot of the buildings in these areas. And I know, this is something that they're already working on and they're looking at, and they've, reduced the carbon content of steam and electricity coming from those. But, things like hospitals, for example, are very challenging to decarbonize. So if we can look at the kind of central systems that are powering them, that's a good way to make a big inroad on that.
That's great. Thank you, Jeff. Irini, I know I didn't ask you about the challenges you see. So just quickly, if you want to answer about the challenges you see cities are facing. And then we've only got 5 minutes left. So I do want to ask everyone in turn what their recommendations are for the future, especially as we sort of look at COP coming up and, what we can all take away as things we can do in thinking about how we're going to reach these great goals. So Irini, first to you.
Very quickly, because I don't know do not have much time. Also, tackling the issue of affordability, I think it's really, really important to support vulnerable low-income households and vulnerable groups to participate in this transition, and cities can do that together with states if they do not have the power, by providing direct access to funding and providing loans and grants. Something that is happening in Greece, where I'm based. Low-income households get very favorable, let's say, loans, zero interest loans to retrofit their homes, and then they can also deal with their energy poverty issues because the house is much more efficient. I think there are two other main challenges except of finance: policies. Cities can do policies, but sometimes their power to implement or even develop these policies is being, let's say, hindered by state, or depending on the local government structure, state policies, for example. We know the issue in the United States, where some states issue, let's say, policies that do not allow cities to remove fossil fuels from buildings. So these issues need to be tackled. And finally, I have a question that I'm wondering: is energy properly valued worldwide? In some cases, in some countries, energy from fossil fuels is heavily subsidized. So this makes the case of retrofits impossible. There is no way you will get your money back, even if it's private or public money. No way, because the energy price is so low. So if we do not set this at the right, let's say, perspective, there is no way that buildings will be decarbonized at the scale and pace we want. They will eventually, because there is no other solution. But we need to take bold decisions, if you'd ask me.
That's great. Great thought to leave us with. Thank you, Irini. And then a quick thought from the rest of the panelists. So one parting thought, Mike?
Yeah, the thought, I think I made the point that COP should think about making new buildings digitally enabled, which doesn't cost more. And right, at least without putting the smart stuff on top, but just before they build it, think about the next 50 years. Don't build buildings from the last century.
Seems like a no-brainer based on the return. Yeah, I agree. Jeff, your thought?
Yeah, I think there was a good question in here about, renewable energy generation, and do we have enough of it for hydrogen and things like that. I think there's tremendous opportunity for renewables out there. We're continuing to see that, solar is by far the cheapest way to buy electricity these days. Soon, I think offshore wind is going to come down in price and parallel that. And so in the not too distant future, we're going to get into an issue where energy isn't the challenge, it's getting it when you need it, because you can't control solar and storage. And so we got to think of things like battery energy storage and hydrogen as means of storage, so that we can really solve our problems.
Great thing to think about. Thank you very much, Jeff. And finally, Judith, your parting words.
Yeah, I will say, it's going to take decarbonizing supply and continuing to reduce overall energy use. So in decarbonizing supply, I think we need to look at all options, cleaner options for molecules, renewable natural gas, hydrogen, look at beneficial electrification where it makes sense as an affordable option, as well as some of these newer ideas that could leverage existing infrastructure like geothermal. And then, of course, continuing to support strong energy efficiency measures, as well as new technologies that can help with that as well.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all of the panelists for great insights, sharing lots of great ideas for what others can do. So really appreciate that. And thank you again, Judith, for National Grid sponsoring this series. So now I'm going to hand it back to Peter, who will launch us into the fireside chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Alistair, and the whole panel. That was a great discussion, and we're going to continue to build on that. If Jackie Ashmore and Craig can turn on their videos and their microphones and join me, we'll get underway. For this fireside chat, we're going to take a little bit of time and talk about how some specific examples with Boston and Edinburgh. Boston in Massachusetts, the U.S. Northeast, Edinburgh, of course, capital of Scotland in the UK, have both done some very innovative and engaged and active leadership work. And circling back to, I think, some of what Peter Abbott talked about at the very beginning around the importance of partnerships, there's great examples of partnerships from both of those locations. Are you able to turn your video on and your microphones on?
I think I have.
Yes, me too.
Okay, good. Then I think there we are. Okay. So let's get underway here, and I think it'd be very helpful. So Jackie Ashmore is the executive director at the Boston University Institute of Sustainable Energy and also a research associate professor in the BU Department of Mechanical Engineering. Ed Craig is the honorary professor at the University of Edinburgh and also is a senior fellow at the Boston University Institute. We have, as often seen, lots of collegial relationships and collaborations between different universities and academics, and that certainly is the case in this situation. I'd love to hear from each of you to take a minute or two and give a little bit of an overview of how you've seen the role of cities from your work in Edinburgh and Boston, and what you see about the sort of unique roles that cities can be a leader and a convener, and then we'll build on some of that going forward. Jackie, do you want to go first?
Thank you, Peter. It's wonderful to be here with you and also with Ed, who I've known for, I think, at least 2 years now, and always enjoy speaking with. Boston University's Institute for Sustainable Energy is 5 years old, and as we started 5 years ago, it was around about the time the city of Boston set the goal of being carbon neutral by 2050. And so pretty quickly, a team from our institute got drawn into a substantial research project. This was about 6 people and many partners and stakeholders, a lot of stakeholder engagement, working to analyze how can the city accomplish that? What are the pathways? And after about 18 months of work, that resulted in a series of reports, the Carbon Free Boston reports that are easily available online. And one of the things that I'll flag about that plan was it was one of the first major city plans that really lent into the social equity issue and worked to start from the questions that arise from how do we make this transition equitable and accessible to all. And so that really got embedded into all of the analysis. We've seen other connections between the city and not just Boston University, but other universities also. There's a Green Ribbon Commission, which is a group of local leaders from businesses, that includes real estate, healthcare, leaders from utilities, including National Grid, and academia, including President Brown from Boston University. This group works closely with the city on an ongoing basis on climate action and how everybody can work together on it. It's got 4 working groups, one focused on commercial real estate, one following through on Carbon Free Boston, one on climate preparedness, and one on healthcare. In addition to those groups, there's a separate higher education working group that brings together representatives from many of the Boston universities. As many of you know, we have quite the wealth of higher education institutions here. And there are 4 working groups under that higher education working group that are really focusing in on how do we use the research knowledge that people in academia have and apply it in support of equitable climate action in the city. So this is just a group that is focused, it's deliberate, it's proactive, it meets regularly. I'm in one of the working groups, we meet every 2 weeks. And so I think there's a real powerhouse in that partnership and its support for the city. So I could say plenty more, but I want to let Ed get his piece in too.
We all, Jackie, that Boston's the best university up there in the Northeast. Yeah, we'll put the thing forward to that. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm an American Scot. I was born in New Jersey and raised in Scotland, and I've been working within the climate crisis for 25 years now. I had hair when I started. It was incredible. Scotland's also had a bit of a journey, a bit like my head. It was known as the dirty man of Europe back in the 1970s and 80s. We seem to treat our beautiful countryside just like a large waste bin and throw everything. And next year, it's very, very likely that Scotland will have itself 100% of its electricity will come from renewable energy. That's been the transition of Scotland over that time period from, frankly, an embarrassment where we pumped our unfiltered sludge into the sea in boats and through things, to being 100% powered by renewable energy for electricity. And that, I'm going to comment on Dr. Abbott's comment about where cities lead, nations follow, because in Scotland, it wasn't like that. The nation stood forward and the cities have followed from that perspective. Scotland decided to have the first ever Climate Change Act back in 2009, and then has decided it wants to become zero carbon by 2045, and has set in place a series of mechanisms and policies and organizations to try to encourage the public sector, the academic sector, and very specifically the enterprise sector to move into this space to make Scotland not only a finer place to live, but also one that could lead the world or parts of the world in many of our key challenges we find. Edinburgh, where I've lived, and I've obviously worked with the universities at Edinburgh for way over 20 years, has been a laggard compared to Scotland from that perspective. But we've caught up now, and we've set ourselves a very challenging target of being zero carbon by 2030. Now, that is exceptionally difficult, but I don't mind good aspiration. I think that creates a really rich space for partnership and a rich space for aspiration, for innovation to allow us to achieve that going through. And Edinburgh is filling this time by establishing a climate change strategy, which is currently out for consultation, but also creating really interesting partnerships working across the whole knowledge triangle with academics and with corporates, attempting to try to drive forward the solutions, to try to address the people with problems, the problem owners, so to speak, and link them with solution providers going forward. And it's working very, very successfully now. We have a range of different pathways and opportunities that we're investing in. Allow me just to give you one just to finish off this section right now. So we have hosted just on the outskirts of Edinburgh a company which takes all of your white and green glass cullet. It takes it and puts it through an absorption process and reactivates the glass and transforms it into a media that you can use in wastewater treatment. So imagine a process that takes 90% of all the green glass or white glass in a region and then turns it into something that you can use to treat wastewater up to the highest possible levels. That circular approach is one that we want to achieve across a massive area of transport, energy, housing, and others. I'll stop there.
Great example. Thanks, Ed. So there's a lot of really interesting initiatives in both Boston and in Edinburgh and neighboring regions and states as well to learn from. I'd love to maybe drill a little bit deeper with some examples that are building specific as well, since that's a big part of what we're talking about here. And I think there may be initiatives around policy, around building performance, things of that type that are being prioritized in some of your cities and in some of your efforts. So if you could take a few minutes and share some of that, that would be great. Jackie, you want to kick that off?
Sure. I'll start with one example of Boston University kind of demonstrating what's possible. We have a university commitment to be carbon neutral by 2040. And at this time, we're building a new data sciences building, which is going to be 19 stories tall. And it will have no fossil fuel connections. So we're using 31 geothermal wells and obviously intensive energy efficiency efforts. And so that's been a challenge that the Boston University has embraced, with the idea of let's demonstrate what's truly possible to inspire others to consider how they're building new buildings. But equally, there are lots of great things happening in other areas, including the city. I think we heard mention earlier of the zero net carbon standard for new municipal buildings and for affordable housing. And the energy efficiency and renewable procurement for municipal buildings in Boston. We also have a building energy reporting and disclosure ordinance. So this is annual reporting of energy and water use by large and medium buildings in the city, and a commitment to undertake a major energy savings action or assessment every 5 years. And the city is really targeting those high volume buildings and high usage buildings to get some low hanging fruit and pick it quickly. And I also want to give a shout out. A few folks have talked about the workforce development side of this and how critical that is. Greg King, who we're going to hear from later in this program, set up the Building Automation System Instructional Lab at Roxbury Community College. And I think that's a great example of ensuring that people who need good paying jobs in the future are going to have the skill set and the experience to launch into green jobs and really support decarbonization effectively.
Thanks. Several great topics. So maybe we'll come back to a little bit of that, but Ed, it's love to have you jump in from around.
Sure. Let me
apply
in with a few examples. Yeah, no, absolutely, and policy included. Edinburgh, in my understanding, is playing catch up. We have an overheating city, a city which is growing at a really powerful rate right now. And so this is becoming an even larger issue. And it's also a heritage city filled with, as you know, beautiful castles, and 50% of our housing stock is pre-1945. So we have a ginormous challenge regarding retrofitting and getting appropriate retrofitting into those existing buildings and into heritage buildings. And only 5% of our energy for those buildings currently come from renewable sources. So that is a huge challenge that we're trying to address. So what Edinburgh City Council have done through a policy perspective is they have decided that they are going to adapt the passive house standard for all their new buildings going forward. This is a step up massively from the BREEAM standards, which they were applying before. So they're making a really strong statement saying we need to meet these standards and exceed these standards in our new buildings going forward. And partnership is going to be key. Looking at the heritage side, we work with our national bank here, the Royal Bank of Scotland, looking at different alternative technologies towards dealing with heritage buildings. So alternative sources, for example, of secondary glazing, and also inputting of data and IT technologies into the fabric of the buildings to give the information to improve and enhance our retrofitting abilities. And these are live programs that are ongoing.
Quick question maybe for both of you, but how do you actually transform the culture of the university, so from the ivory tower and thinking about important thoughts and actually being a partner in implementing leadership projects? How does that happen?
With difficulty and slowly is my honest answer, having worked with Edinburgh-based universities and Edinburgh University for over 20 years. There is, especially in ancient universities, a huge focus on research first, research second, research third. And we were addressing issues of COP earlier. The reality is we know that the vast majority of the workable solutions are already out there. We just need them tailored, we need them shared, we need them adapted. It was described as before that we can't take a cookie cutter approach to this options. I see it more as a jigsaw puzzle. It's not quite a cookie cutter, but we just need to slot that in. And we need to make sure that our academics are being encouraged through funding and through partnership to make sure that the outputs that they are engaging in are shared outputs with the problem owners, with the corporates, with the public sector organizations, to encourage them to come through. And frankly, we also have to work on our listening skills to make sure that we're not simply adapting someone's problem into your own research project. It's a big challenge, but I'm not being overly negative. It is improving over time, and we are getting better and better at it.
It makes great points. I'd say at Boston University, there have been kind of two powerful forces in addressing this. So one is top-down leadership, and President Brown has clearly made sustainability a priority in his tenure with both a bold climate action plan. People were actually a little wary of the 2040 goal because they thought he might not realize how much it might cost. And he just pushed at the midpoint of that planning process. He said, nope, if the city has a 2050 goal, we'll make a 2040 goal because we're smaller, we should be able to do it more rapidly. So that top-down leadership has been incredibly powerful. And our institute has, in its research, always prioritized applied research in partnership with a city or a utility or whoever the external partner is who can benefit from our research. The bottom-up force that I would highlight is, as Ed said, our faculty, they get tenure, they get promotions based on their publications. But in a recent review of our institute, what we heard loud and clear from the faculty is we love to be able to, fulfill our requirements for publications to advance our careers, but then, in some extra time, come to the institute and do work that is, driving a difference on the ground. And there was very widespread and very specific feedback that they wanted that opportunity. They were willing to put in additional hours and effort in order to know that they're really engaged with communities. One example is we have some public health professors doing incredible research on heat effects in Chelsea, and they've got citizens with apps on their phones and collecting data throughout the summer. So unusually, I would say at Boston University, people have a thirst for that, and it's really quite powerful.
Great. So really good points about policy, but also changing roles in academia and partnership with certainly with cities, with companies in the private sector. I think there's another category where partnership, new types of partnership is really important, and that's been touched upon by a bunch of speakers, and that's really on the environmental justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion side. How to make sure some of those communities who have not been involved really are involved and are beneficiaries of the transition to a clean economy. And we don't have a lot of time, so some brief thoughts there. Yeah, go ahead.
Some brief thought. This is such a key point and raised earlier. I think I agree with what my colleague is saying regarding the importance of leadership and allowing the broad umbrella for our colleagues to engage. But we also have to create the active processes, the threads, to allow our corporate or SME, but specifically our citizens, our individuals, to engage with our universities, which are often very, very challenging, not to touch into, but to actually create a deep partnership. So at Edinburgh, through the Edinburgh Centre for Carbon Innovation, we created something called the Climate Commission, which allowed for citizenry and individuals to actually actively engage and also encourage the City of Edinburgh Council. And they didn't need much encouragement to make sure it was a very public process in sharing the climate strategy to allow that engagement through. And we're not just talking about individuals, but also SMEs. And the more engaged all parts of society are, the more just that could be. And that has to be embedded into the strategy going forward, and is.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that it's important to bear in mind is when you truly engage with those communities from the beginning, and when you start with the question of, what are your challenges in your day-to-day life, it even starts to change the questions that you ask in research. It's not that you're asking the same questions as previously and finding different answers because you're factoring social justice in. It actually fundamentally changes the questions. And so really building those trusted relationships and making sure those people are in the very first conversations you have is really critical. Otherwise, you're not really bringing all that you can to that challenge and contributing all that you can.
Very, very important. Wow, I wish we had another 15 and 20 minutes, but we are unfortunately out of time for this segment.
Just keep going.
We are going to keep going in the next part, and I think we're going to keep connections with certainly Jackie and Ed, with both of you and others as well. Thank you so much for your thoughts on this and for the work that you're doing. Thanks for being part of this today. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Alistair to introduce the Innovation Lightning Round and this last segment. Alistair.
Thank you very much, Peter. So one of the things that NECC does as part of its program and its agenda is to encourage innovation. And you've heard a lot of the speakers today talk about it, the need for innovation, so that we can meet all the targets that are being set around the world. So I would like to give 4 minutes each to these three gentlemen, and I would like to start with Udi Merav, who is a serial entrepreneur and a founder and president of Inverid Systems, and I'll let him explain what that is and what he's bringing to the table. So Udi, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. That's great. I'm honored to be here today, and good morning to everyone. So Inverid Systems has developed technology that has to do with air conditioning. And I'll say a few words about that. And what I also would like to relate is some of the practical challenges of getting new physical technologies into buildings. But let me start just with a little bit of background. When it comes to energy efficiency, there's not one silver bullet that's going to solve or significantly affect energy efficiency of buildings. It's a hodgepodge of multitude of things, but there are some low-hanging fruit. And we started by identifying what we consider as one of the big low-hanging fruits of energy efficiency in buildings. That is the energy waste in air conditioning that has to do with the fact that air conditioning systems in commercial buildings constantly draw in air into the building. They bring air from outside the building into the building while expelling some of the existing air. And the reason they do that is for air quality. It's because there is a slow but constant buildup of unwanted gases, molecules in the air from the people and from the objects in the building. And the standard way where buildings do this is to replace the air. The problem is it's a very energy intensive process because you have nice, cool or conditioned air inside, and you're bringing air from the outside, which is always at the wrong temperature. Too cold in the winter, too hot in the summer, always producing additional energy load. And we're talking a very significant load. It can be as high as 50% of the entire cooling load on a building in a hot summer day. And our approach was fairly straightforward conceptually, technologically very fancy. It's a method to clean the air inside the building using adsorbents. And we've started this 11 years ago. It's been deployed in many buildings over the last 5 years. And we have a growing family of products around it. So this is all good, and the savings are very significant. But it's been a very challenging task to get into large number of buildings. The uptake has been slow. And one of the things that we've found is that trying to retrofit an existing building, you encounter several issues. The one that I get most animated about is this idea of a payback. If you say this is technology that's going to save you money, that becomes the entire conversation. And for some reason, there's a culture that it has to be a 2 or 3 year payback. Anything more than that is not interesting. So the buildings have a time horizon, which is very short, and that's very restrictive. On top of that, there's misaligned incentives in buildings. The building ownership and the tenants in the building and the facility management have different issues and different concerns. And you need all of them on board to make an energy efficiency technology that's paid by the owner but the benefit goes to the tenant and the maintenance has to be done by the facility management. So these issues have become a defining barrier to entry. And on top of that, general risk aversion of the industry. The way we've tried to solve this, which has worked quite well for Inverid, but I think there's bigger lessons here for the technological landscape, is by, rather than going to retrofits, but attaching this technology to new buildings, to when at the time of construction, by engaging with the engineering community of the architects and the mechanical engineers that design buildings, we are able to get on the front end and avert many of these issues. The other angle that we've taken, and more recently, but it's appearing very promising for us, is to integrate our technology as a built-in component inside standard brand name air conditioners. And that takes a long time to get on board with the big air conditioning companies, but we are making very good traction now. And in the near future, we will see standardized air conditioners that have our air cleaning technology integrated into them. So these are very interesting solutions for our company, and it's going to enable us to grow and enter the market more significantly. But there's a bigger lesson here, I think, about how to get hardware technology into buildings. And I think the only way that we can figure out how that gets solved is by injecting additional incentives, carrots and sticks into the system of diverging interests in order to get the retrofits to make economic sense and functional sense for buildings. And this is going to require intervention at the level of local governments and maybe even national governments as well. But that's where we're doing it. Thank you very much for your time, and it's a fantastic session. I'm glad that you heard this.
It proves that technological innovation is not the only thing. You need policy and incentives and partnerships to make it all work. So great lessons. Thank you, Udi. So next, I would like to ask Greg King, who Jackie Ashmore already mentioned, but Greg is a tireless warrior for diversifying the clean tech workforce, and he's got a great innovation, which is not, I guess it's using technology, but it helps to point a light on where we can fight for equity. So Greg, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Alistair, and good afternoon and good evening to my colleagues from the UK. And so as Alistair mentioned, I'm here today to talk about the use of information technology as a tool for influencing policy and more effectively administrating programs that, for instance, address things like environmental justice. Next slide. Today we've been talking largely about, cities. And when I think about decarbonizing cities and climate action, I really think about, energy systems transformation and how do we make those transformations enabling a more, just, future. I'm a big fan of Project Drawdown, and you would certainly, recommend if anyone hasn't read the Drawdown report and is involved in climate action, please do so. But, climate actions, beyond addressing, greenhouse gases, climate solutions have a co-benefit that contribute to a better, more equitable world if we make it so. Climate solutions are rarely climate solutions on themselves. One solution that, for instance, curb air pollution also support health solutions. And so last year, in partnership with a cohort of students from the Northeast School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs, I embarked upon a mission to influence the Massachusetts climate legislation with respect to codifying environmental justice and essentially setting aside funding for various different environmental priorities, including the establishment of certain clean energy and energy efficiency programs, the establishment of an advisory council consisting of members from environmental justice communities, and also trying to address the reality that we have to grow the size and diversity of our workforce in order to meet our climate goals. And more importantly, we need to really reach out and aggressively bring employment opportunities from residents from different environmental justice communities. So in support of that, we've developed a energy burden GIS system. Next slide. And we did this using data from our national data set from DOE. It's the Low Income Energy Affordability data set. And we overlaid that with data from the Massachusetts Executive Office of Environmental Affairs, environmental justice designations. And so this system, and I've put a live version of it in the chat. Next slide. It is really designed initially to educate legislators on environmental justice disparities within their own jurisdiction. And so this system provides energy burden data as a percent of income. It allows you to filter on various different environmental justice conditions. And more importantly, it was designed so that I could pull up an environmental justice district for either a senator or a legislator and show them within their own jurisdictions where environmental justice disparities or energy burden disparities actually existed. And I'm very pleased that this particular approach to advocacy resulted in the incorporation of many of the concepts in the climate bill that was passed in the 26th, and it's being evolved now as a potential policy tool to help policy, as a tool to enable more effective program development. So the Mass Clean Energy Center, for instance, here is going to be responsible for a portion of this activity, and this tool will be a useful tool for them to help prioritize where certain clean energy training programs and other initiatives are actually hosted. And as I mentioned, I will include the this in the chat.
Thank you, Greg.
That concludes my comments.
Thank you very much for covering so much in such short a time. And I'd like to turn now to the most patient man today, waiting for the last speaking slot, Dave Pearson, who comes to us from Star Refrigeration. And I will let him introduce himself. But Dave, you come from Glasgow, so we're looking forward to hearing more about COP as well. So over to you.
Thank you. And first of all, I should say, any of you coming to Glasgow for COP, please get in touch. I'd be delighted to see you in the flesh. I doubt the weather will be as nice as it is today. It's a sparkling 27 degrees C, which is about 80 Fahrenheit in Glasgow, which is quite tropical, I can assure you. So I have about 210 seconds to inform you and inspire you about the work that we've been doing. And if we go to the next slide, I'll get into that. So start with half a quote, first of all, with that famous philosopher, Matthew McConaughey, who said, "A man who invented the hamburger was smart." And I'll come back to the second half later on. Next slide, please. So what we're working in is heat pumps and district heating. And I feel a little bit of a fraud being pitched as an innovator in that sense, because heat pumps were first talked about by Lord Kelvin in 1852. And district heating made its appearance in America in 1853 at the Naval Academy, Annapolis, 1877 it took until it arrived in New York. Birdsall Hawley was the gentleman who deployed that at Lockport. But what we get excited about in terms of district heating coupled with heat pumps is this suite of opportunities. Clean air, of course, is very topical, and renewables is very topical. But the one I want to pick up on and drive forward today is the smart grids aspect of heat pumps. So next slide, please. So the first thing about heat pumps is they're very, very different in the segments they approach. Everything from new build, small houses to high density. And then industrial, we're doing some really interesting work with heat pumps generating steam at up to about 160 degrees C, which is about 280 Fahrenheit, I believe. And that might actually throw an interesting piece for the older generation district heating systems in the US that are steam-based. So next slide, please. So what have we done, and what gives us this sort of standpoint? Well, we were the first company in the world to do a 90 degrees C ammonia heat pump, and that was done for a project in Norway a long time ago now. This shows how fast the world is moving. But 10 years ago, we did a 13 megawatt system in a Norwegian town called Drammen, and it took us another 10 years to do the same thing again in the UK. And that was despite heavy subsidies for this, about 2.5 times the cost of burning natural gas is given per kilowatt hour, and still it took us 10 years. So we've now deployed this system just west of Glasgow in another city called Clydebank, and it's taking river water and heating it, taking the river water, cooling it down slightly by about 3 degrees, and raising the heat in the district heating loop up to 85 degrees. Now we achieve that because we're using industrial technology, because we're using ammonia as the working fluid. We're getting an efficiency of about 3 to 1, and that's really important because 48 or so weeks of the year it's quite windy in Scotland. That's why we've got such high levels of renewable electricity. We're taking 1 unit of electricity and making 3 units of heat, and that gives us an upside. Hydrogen was mentioned earlier, but if you take 1 unit of electricity and make hydrogen, you're down to about 0.6, 0.7 units of heat as a derivative from that. So we're getting 4 to 5 times as much heat. And I think as we go forward, it's really important that we keep efficiency uppermost in our minds. The very small in this picture, because we're stood quite far away, the black tank to the right of the stack is actually a thermal store. It's 135,000 litres of water. And what that lets us do is heat the water when we want to, when the grid is offering us cheaper electricity and it's freely available. But if the grid becomes stressed, as it does do, we've gone from 60 power stations in the UK to 60,000 small power stations, if you like, we can drop that electrical connection in less than a second and unload from the grid. And that gives us massive financial opportunities, because a megawatt dropped off the grid is just as valuable as a megawatt dropped onto the grid. And so there's very, very significant upsides for that. So next slide, please. What we see in the future is offshore directly coupled. We've got tremendous problems with the grid in all the countries, not least of all the capacity of the grid, but also the pricing mechanisms of this. In the UK, it's about, I guess it's about £50 per megawatt hour to generate electricity. But if you buy it, once it's been through all the taxation levels and the grid transmission charges, it's about 3 times that cost. So if we could direct couple that electricity into heat pumps on barges on the open water around about the cities, be it Boston, New York, etc., and then district heating into the cities, that would give us that cost advantage as well as the efficiency advantage I mentioned. So next slide, please. So back to that famous philosopher. The man who invented the hamburger was smart. And the next slide, next click, please. But the man who invented the cheeseburger was a genius. So for me, the hamburger is district heating and the cheeseburger is district heating plus a big heat pump plus storage. And that gives us the advantage going forwards. So that's my words for today. And thank you to the organizers.
Dave, that was great. Thank you. And I did notice that in the picture, you did have the whiskey industry as one of the ones you're supporting. So I wish I was coming to Glasgow for COP26, because I'd really love to take a tour with you. But thank you for great insights there. And hopefully we can see heat pumps like that in Boston and New York.
Thank you.
So Peter, I'd like to hand it back to you now to talk about upcoming events, if you're there.
Yes, I am. Thank you, Alistair, and thank you to all of our speed round innovators, to the fireside chat participants, to the panelists. Thank you to National Grid for your sponsorship of this event and this Connecting Regions on the Road to COP26 series. As we wrap up here, we have a couple of additional things coming up. On August 4th, our annual legislative roundup, looking at the roundup of clean energy legislation progress across the Northeast. And on September 14th, the third in this series, the Connecting Regions on the Road to COP26, and this one will be focused on clean transportation, another very important topic, where we'll try to again incorporate multiple perspectives, think about policy, think about business and partnerships, explore innovation as well. We can see the next slide, please. We also have an event coming up in mid-November. November 18th is our Green Tie Gala. It was on hiatus last year with COVID, but this year it is coming back. So please look for that. There's some information on our website. We will be opening up sales for tickets and for tables very shortly. And I think that is it for the upcoming events. I think so. I want to thank one more time. Thank you to everybody for this, your participation. It was a great opportunity, I think, to do a bit of what NECEC does as a business member nonprofit, and a nonprofit organization that's focused on being a partner to the clean energy transformation and transition to a clean economy in the Northeast, and building partnerships with other regions around the world. There's so much opportunity to collaborate, learn from each other, accelerate each other's efforts, sharing insights, and help to make these next several decades be really important to the transition to clean economies around the world. Thanks for being part of it. Please stay connected to us and each other, and we'll see you again soon.